Okay, welcome everyone. This is a special meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee. Today is Tuesday, February 27th, and we have 6 to 7 p.m. held. This is a training, so we'll kind of leave when you run out of questions to ask. It may be before 7, and if you have a lot of questions, we do have the whole hour. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I'm just going to go over some meeting logistics. This is a virtual meeting. It is being live streamed on YouTube and it is being recorded. A copy of the recording will be posted on the transition website under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available. To access closed captioning, please click on the CC button on the bottom of your screen. For committee members, please take this moment to change your chat settings to everyone so that folks listening in can follow along with the chat. And please remember that the chat is part of the public meeting record. For community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature on tonight. So you can submit questions or comments along the way through that. It's on the bottom of your screen. We may not answer questions along the way, but we do read them and they also become part of the public meeting record. At today's meeting, it is kind of a special training. We're not taking verbal public comment, but as a reminder, folks can submit public comment at any time by calling 311, emailing us at transition@portlandoregon.gov, or submitting public comment through our online form through the transition website. If you do want to give verbal public comment to the Government Transition Advisory Committee, the next opportunity to do that is their full regular meeting on March 13th, and you can sign up now online. Next slide, please. So the very simple agenda is a training from the City Attorney's Office on political campaigning by public officials, which you are, I am. I have gotten this training before and I find it really useful, especially as we go into an election cycle. So we can go to the next slide, and I am thrilled to introduce Maya Hyam from the City Attorney's Office, who is kind enough to give us this training. And with that, Maya, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Julia. Again, my name is Maya. I work with the City Attorney's Office. I've been with the city for about 7 years, and I've been working on Charter Commission since the inception, actually on Charter Transition reform since the first Charter Commission meeting. I was the staff attorney for them. And I just want to, at the outset, say thank you so much for your service to the city. I have a great respect for our volunteers, and I'm happy to be with you here tonight. I'm going to be talking about the rules and the guidelines for political campaigning. You are both public officials and independent residents and citizens who can voice your political views. We just have to figure out the right way to do that. I am very interruptible, so if you have a question, please just unmute yourself and ask. You know, with these boxes, it's sometimes hard for me to see who's raising their hand, and I don't want anyone to feel as if they're being overlooked or excluded. It's just because I can't see. So feel free to shout out. So with that, first, next slide, please. Okay, so the basic rule is found in Oregon statute, and I've cited it there for you. And you've got this entire slide deck in your materials, as well as some a brief prepared by the Secretary of State. So you've got the site there. It's ORS 260432. That's really the entire universe of the statutes related to political campaigning. And it's a very easy, basic rule, which is public officials. And as Julia mentioned, you are public officials by virtue of your membership on the GTAC. You may not engage in political activity while on the job. And we're going to unpack what some of those terms mean, in particular on the job, in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Before we unpack the term on the job, I want to be really clear about when this rule applies, because there's really very bright line rules for most categories except for one. So let's go through the slide and see what I mean. For ballot measures, when a ballot measure is certified to the ballot, the rule becomes in place and you may not advocate or take a political position while on the job. And a city measure is certified when it is filed with the county elections officer. And there's a process that ballot measures go through. So there are some that are currently circulating in the community. I believe there's one circulating signatures for participatory budgeting. We are looking at some ballot measures or proposed ballot measures for overhauling the future police community oversight board. That isn't on the street for signatures yet, but it will be in a bit. So until those ballot measures are certified, which they are not currently, they need to gather enough signatures in order to be certified to the ballot. Then and only then does the restriction come into place when it relates to ballot measures. And if you have questions, you can always look on the city auditor's office website. That shows you very clearly, and they update that frequently about where ballot measures are in the process. So you can always find out where those ballot measures are by looking at the auditor's website. The second category is for political committees. Can you support or denigrate a particular political committee? And the answer is probably not. And that's because if the committee is active, then the rule is in place. And obviously, if a committee is inactive, it seems unlikely that they would be a player in the political sphere. So why comment? But you can comment on political committees if they are inactive. When they're active, the restrictions are in place. And the third category, and this is the one that is probably most relevant because we're in an election year where all 14 of our elected positions are up for election. And the rules are in place for whenever the candidate is active. And this is a little bit tricky because no official declaration of candidacy is required. And let me give you a real world example where a few years ago, excuse me, quite quickly after the DA election, one of our police officers was at a neighborhood association event, invited in her capacity as a police officer wearing a police uniform, and a member of the neighborhood association or someone in the audience asked what a resident could do to really support more law and order in the community. And the police officer responded that they could vote for whoever was the opponent of the current DA in the next election cycle. So seemingly very close in time to the most recent election. And you would think that's a relatively safe period because it's 4 years until the next election. However, that particular candidate had received a candidate campaign contribution for the next campaign. And so that police officer drew a complaint that was filed with the ethics committee, the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, excuse me, and received a declaration of a letter of education. So that, I think, an easy trap to fall into. I think if you believe someone's a candidate or have reason to suspect, the restrictions are in place. You cannot rely on an official declaration of candidacy. Any questions there? I think that's probably one of the trickier aspects. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is a slide that really talks about on the job, and it's a little bit hard for you guys. It's easy for me, right? Like I'm a paid employee. When I'm at work, it's a little bit interesting because of hybrid and COVID. So right now I'm at my house, but I'm clearly at work. When I'm at City Hall, I'm clearly at work. For you guys, it's a little less cut and dry, but there are some guidelines. So when you're at a committee meeting, you are currently at a committee meeting. So right now, all of us are on the job. You are also on the job when you're working on a duty assigned by the committee. So if you're out in the field collecting information, feedback, soliciting opinions, giving a briefing, or working in any way with the public in your capacity as a GTAC member, you are on the job. And when you're appearing at an event in an official capacity, again, you are on the job. So those are really the three areas where you guys are almost certainly going to be on the job, and you want to be careful. The rules will be in place for you in those moments. And I have a couple of examples we can walk through, I believe, on the next slide, please.
Maya, before
Yes.
you do that, Fred has his hand up. Fred, do you
Oh,
want to go?
thank you, Julie. Fred?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Maya. This is all right on spot, and I appreciate the presentation. One of the committee assignments for members is to meet not just with groups, appearing at events or duties assigned by committee, but to volunteer to talk to individuals as well. And I guess does not fall within being on the job.
If you are gathering information when you're talking to a group or an individual, and you're going to bring that information back to the committee,
right,
as part of your information gathering, then it doesn't matter how big or small the group is, even if it's a group of one, you're still on the job. And you can have lots of conversations, but you want to be careful not to endorse or to say, I would never vote for this person when you're on the job. And you really want to think about it. I sort of imagine like a police officer or a fire officer is a great example of firefighter, because they have official uniforms, right? It's very clear when you're interacting with them, usually assuming they're not brass or higher in plain clothes, but they're very clearly acting on the job. So I always imagine, like, if I have a cloak on, like the City of Portland cloak, if I'm out there doing the work of the city, then I'm cloaked with the city's authority. And the reason that this policy exists is we don't want public employees, elected officials get to opine on almost anything, but employees and appointed officials must remain neutral when we're acting in our official capacity.
right.
So even if the group is just one person, if you're bringing that information back and you're having that conversation because you're intending to bring that information back, you are on the job.
Okay, another question here, Maya, this is related. If I'm a member, this is not me, particularly, it's a general question. If any member of GTAC were to file or become active as a candidate for, say, city council or mayor or auditor, and then went on to one of our events as in our work plan to meet with community groups, is that campaigning, or is that somehow possibly violating?
It would not, unless you were in fact campaigning. So just
Oh.
because you file for candidacy doesn't mean you have to step down from the GTAC, unless you guys have something written in your rules, or I can't remember.
No, we don't.
That's not, I think that might have been a discussion. So unless.
Yeah, there has been a discussion. That's one of my concerns. Let's say I'm a candidate in District 2 and I go to a neighborhood association meeting in District 2 as a GTAC member, but I'm also a candidate for, say, city council in District 2. What are the prescriptions statutorily or by rule?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Well, can you go to the next slide? I think I have some information about how to, it's not there. Okay, never mind. Don't look at that slide yet, everyone. So to answer Fred's question, one of the things that I frequently recommend candidates do when they're a current employee, if they're already an elected and they're running for re-election, or for anybody who's on one of our advisory bodies and is running for office, which is not infrequent. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, provided that you're in compliance with the way that the committee has been set up and the rules. But I always make it very clear that when you're attending an event, you choose whether you're appearing as a GTAC member or a candidate. And I would keep a little diary and write down contemporaneously the date, what event you are, and in what capacity you're appearing, so that if you do draw a complaint, you have a really good defense, right? So you can imagine for elected officials who are running for re-election and they are not allowed to campaign for themselves on city time or use city resources, this comes very important for them, because if they want to make phone calls, they step out during lunch across the street or somewhere else, and then they want to be really clear about documenting that. So if anybody does complain, they can pull that up and say, no, look, I am aware of what the law is, my responsibilities. I've been very conservative in the way that I am meeting my obligations, and here is my proof. And I've never seen anybody who does that have a sustained complaint. So that is a really good way to approach an event. I would never suggest that you do a hybrid because I think it's just very confusing, and you're going to have a significant challenge keeping straight. And the problem is with the audience, right? Like the audience needs to have a very clear understanding of whether you're appearing as a candidate or as a committee member. Very different roles. Does that help?
Yes, thank you, Maya. Appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely, thank you. Okay, so
sorry, Maya. We have one more.
okay, thank you.
Amy, go ahead.
Hi, I just want to make sure I understand this from the perspective of what if you're working like either volunteering or staff member on a campaign, and you're just identifying yourself like as who you are in the world. Like, my name is Amy Randall. I am a GTAC member. I'm also have XYZ position in this campaign. Aren't those things like intrinsically linked, you know?
Well, and as a big, I'm going to answer your question, but before I do, I forgot to mention, I don't know why I'm fuzzy. I assume I'm still fuzzy, Julia. So I apologize. I'm just having technical difficulties. Thank you for bearing with me. And Amy, the answer to your question is, I think that like if you're appearing, can you give me an example of where you might be appearing, where you would want to identify both of your roles?
I'm thinking just generally, like on my LinkedIn, for example, I have like I will be sharing political opinions, and also I'm a member of the GTAC committee, and I'm informed about my political opinions because I've been engaged in this work. And like, I'm kind of like, we as public figures, like also as, like, just, I don't know if this question really makes sense, but that's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, let's go through this slide and let's talk about and I'm gonna on the fly do an example with LinkedIn, because I think that's a great example. And that what you're talking about is the use of title. Like in your LinkedIn account, you want to be able to state that you're staff for a candidate as well as GTAC member. So there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But this is where it gets tricky, and let's walk through this example. And it's the use of title. Committee members may use their title, including endorsing a measure or a PAC or a candidate, if they are not acting in an official capacity when authorizing use of their title. So let's walk through the example on the slide, and then we'll turn to LinkedIn. What is allowable is on personal time, a committee member is approached and asked for their endorsement of the measure using their title. That's fine, no problem. What's not allowable is if during this meeting, let's say one of you suggested, hey, I'd really like the GTAC to take an official position on a measure that's been certified to the ballot, and I want us all to use our titles. That is not appropriate, because you're on the job, so there can be no use of titles while you're on the job. Now, if you're on LinkedIn and you're just passively looking at, and I just want to, yes, it does. Yes, Fred, candidates and measures and PACs. They're all anytime, use those interchangeably when I use them in an example, because those are the three categories. But if you use the title and say, and let's go to the next slide, because this, I believe, is on the next slide. Okay, so the use of title will continue here with the LinkedIn example. The use of of your title in political advocacy must be the only indication that the committee member is acting in an official capacity. So here's what would be allowable. You can write a letter to the editor on personal time that contains political advocacy with your title. You can, and then again, this is here when I said document when you're acting in your official capacity and when you're on a personal time. Here's what would not be allowable. If you write a letter to the editor on personal time that contains political advocacy, references your position as a committee member. For example, you say, during my time on the GTAC, we carefully considered this measure, and through that, I learned about it, and I can now heartily endorse it, and you include your title. That it would be impermissible and a violation of the regulation and the statute. And I think that's very confusing. And the difference is small, but really important. So remember when I talked about that cloak of city authority? You can only use your title. You can't use your title and then say, because I'm a committee member, I have learned about this ballot measure, or because I'm a GTAC member, I have learned about this candidate and I wholeheartedly give them my support. You cannot combine those two. I find this very confusing, but this is not my rule. This is the Secretary of State's rule, and that's the way that they apply it. So when it comes to the LinkedIn example, if you are simply listing your positions, which is no problem, you can do that. And you can use your titles and also say, on personal time, you can post things that contain political advocacy. But you cannot then say, because of my participation on the GTAC, I am aware of this candidate and I endorse them. Again, it seems counterintuitive to me. It's not something that resonates just on a logical level. So I think this is a trap to be aware of. The other thing I should mention is if you have questions, this is a very, very big topic we're covering in a short amount of time. If you have questions, before you act, please contact Julia. And Julia will she'll contact me and will work with you to help you thread a needle if you find yourself having questions. If you act, and after the act, contact Julia, she'll contact me and my response will be, I'm so sorry, retain your own counsel. Because your personal obligations are personal. And that includes compliance with the ethics statutes and the political campaign guidelines. And I certainly never want anybody to be in that position. So if at any point you find something doesn't make sense and you really want to do something and you want to make sure that you're on the right side of the line, just contact Julia before act. Because this one in particular, the use of title, I find myself confusing. But I'll happily work through it with you if it comes up.
Thanks, Maya. We have one more hand. Jose.
I just want to make sure, clarifying this. So if you say, from my experience, I endorse this measure because blah, 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 that's okay. If at the end you sign Jose, GTAC member, as long as you, instead of from my experience, you say, during my time at GTAC, I learned, then you just can't mention it like in the opinion.
That's correct.
Okay.
You can use your title, but you can't then say it's because of my experience on the committee
So as
that
long as
I
you
now
just
have a
experience.
deep. I'm sorry.
If you say just experience and don't mention the committee, that's okay.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay, and also
I find it inexplicable. So
that's why I wanted to double check. And
yes, that's
also,
why the caution at the top of the slide. Like
Yeah, so-
I find this to be the easiest way to run afoul of the statute.
So, and also candidates list their endorsements on their websites.
Yes.
It sounds like it's allowed to put our names, comma, GTAC member.
Yes, you can absolutely endorse a candidate with your name and your title, but do not go into any substantive conversations.
Okay, and one last one, exactly to Amy's point, and I've been doing this, so maybe I'm doing bad things, so let's clear it up right now.
Yes.
I recently joined the David Douglas School Board, and I do a lot of my presentations in East Portland. So when I introduce myself, I do mention that I'm on the school board. So if they need anything, they can talk to me. And I don't talk about the school board, but I do mention it in my introduction. Because it's part of my community. I'm doing presentation in the school district. So should I not do that? I can stop. I mean,
No, that's fine. That's
Okay.
fine.
Okay.
Yeah, you can mention your titles, but you want to be careful that you're not also wrapping up any endorsements using the things you learned while being a public official. And sometimes I get the question, well, elected officials don't seem to have the same rules. And the answer to that is, that's right. Electeds are in a separate category. And the policy reason for that is we really elect people based on their interactions with policy, their positions on policy. So we want to know what those positions are when we go to the ballot, so we can vote based on a candidate's position and the way they align with our values. So that's why the policy treats electeds differently. But we are not electeds. We are employees. We are public officials by virtue of your GTAC membership. So again, you can imagine someone who vehemently disagrees with your politics really taking exception to you saying, well, I 100% disagree with your politics. And the reason I do is because of all this experience I gained through my work with the city, which really should be neutral. And that's sort of the overarching policy.
Thanks, Maya. Terry.
Yeah, just a kind of a quick question, but it won't be quick, I guess. Who authorizes the title is not an issue. For example, I'm a member of GTAC. I go talk to somebody. I endorse them just on my own. And if they decide to use the title, that's kind of up to them, right? So that's the reason that the title is okay and my experience is not.
That's
Now, what happens, because this could happen tomorrow morning? I'm meeting with a candidate about good government and my experience on GTAC, and what I know about the world. And I'd like to give good advice to this candidate because I kind of like this candidate. And someday maybe I would endorse this candidate. Is that a line that I'm crossing anywhere there?
No, and I really appreciate that insight, because that is exactly the reason why use of title has been held acceptable. And that's because we really don't have a lot of control sometimes whether or not somebody's, if you have endorsed them and you just put your name, it's really easy if somebody knows you're a member of GTAC to just add that title for you. And you really don't have a lot of control over the way that your title can be used. What you do have control over is your speech. When you say things like, I endorse this measure, candidate, or PAC because of my experience on the GTAC. And so I think that's the reason behind the Secretary of State's split, why they're going to allow use of title, but not sort of that during my experience, is because people were running into the issue that they might have endorsed someone in their personal capacity, which you're all free to do. And then the campaign added your title and you were unaware they were going to do that. So the Secretary of State has decided they don't want to hold public employees or public officials responsible for someone else's choice. I still think it makes it a challenge for particularly volunteers who aren't steeped in this regularly, like we are at the city, if you're an employee, to navigate but it helps me understand why they've made those choices. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Terry, did you get your specific what about tomorrow question? Okay, you're good. Fred.
Thank you, Julia. I am in the same situation as Terry, and I don't mean to belabor this. I'll be meeting with a candidate Thursday for coffee just to talk about issues and why he's running, et cetera. I don't know that I'll ever endorse him, but I have contributed to a candidate in another district who I've known for years, and he asked for my endorsement. I said, you can name me as a supporter, but do not use my title as a GTAC member. Was I being overly cautious? It seems to me I am, and that he could. I'm not conferring with him as a GTAC member, but it is a position I hold besides being a social justice, civil rights advocate in the community, which is, I think, the title he's using.
Yeah,
Correct.
so the candidate can use your title. They shouldn't if you tell them not to. And I think that would
Wow.
maybe, might want to have a discussion with them. But there's nothing inherently wrong with the use of the title.
Well, the question was, I asked him not to use my title because was I being overly cautious?
I don't think so. It's a personal call. It's your judgment call, and the judgment call that I would make. But remember that I'm an attorney, and so I usually skew conservative on judgment calls. Is I really feel very strongly about protecting the public trust. And as you've seen the public trust eroded, just swept away on the federal level, very challenging on the state level, and even very challenging on the local level, which is where statistically most people are the most satisfied with their government. And the reason that all of us as public officials have to adhere to ethics statutes is in order to safeguard that trust. I would, for me personally, not permit my title to be used because I wouldn't want that connection and any, I would just want to be very conservative about protecting the public trust. And so I would want, in fact, I probably wouldn't even endorse someone because of my position with the city attorney's office. Certainly not publicly, but that's my judgment call. You can certainly make a different judgment call, and the law would permit you to allow your title to be used.
All right. Thank you.
Yes. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are some areas where we are simply prohibited from carrying out these activities, and they're pretty obvious, right? We can't on the job. Remember, all of these prohibitions only apply when we're on the job. We can't prepare or distribute material advocating a political position, which makes sense, right? I was at City Hall today. Nobody wants me using the copier to make flyers for a candidate. You may not post website information, transmit emails, or make a presentation advocating a political position while on the job. You may not collect funds or correspondence on behalf of political committees, remember, on the job. And you may not produce or distribute a news release or letter announcing an elected official's political position. So remember, those electeds occupy a nice rarefied category where they really don't have to be consistent with the statute. Well, they are consistent with the statute because they're accepted, but there are a lot of prohibitions about them asking people like me, public employees, to make and prepare information that reflects their political position. They have to do that themselves. Next slide, please. There are some things that are allowable, and I think these make sense as well. So we can prepare and distribute impartial written material or make an impartial presentation discussing election subjects. So if you think about the Charter Commission's ballot measure, even when that had been certified to the ballot, the city was still making presentations, and we were distributing written material. I will tell you that I reviewed, I believe, everything that went out to make sure that it was in fact neutral. But if it's neutral and impartial, you are, even if it's on the job and the prohibitions are in place, you are allowed to produce impartial material. You can respond to public records requests for information about material advocating a political position. So for example, while we scrubbed the website on the city's site, we would be able to respond to public records requests for any of that information that had previously been up there that may have been considered advocacy. And you can perform standard job duties. You can take minutes at a public meeting, you can maintain public records, and you can open mail. And I'm reading, Fred, your question, what restriction, okay. Sorry, it went away too fast. Julie, can you read that for me or someone else? Fred, can you just read it out
Yeah,
loud?
I'm happy to read
Okay,
it. We
thank
have
you.
all in caps, so I'm not sure if it's
Okay,
important, more important. What restrictions do GTAC members have regarding current initiative petition campaigns for city measures?
well, nothing has been certified to the ballot.
Right,
So the only ones that I'm aware of are the participatory budgeting
right.
measure, and then the two police
Accountability board,
initiatives.
right.
All of those are in different phases, and none of them have been certified. So no rules apply currently.
So circulating the petitions, for instance,
You could, yeah, if you would like to, you know, gather
Okay.
signatures, I mean,
Right.
you do not lose your freedom of expression by virtue of your participation with the GTAC.
okay.
You would
and-
want to be careful, I think, to not wear like a big GTAC hat.
Right, so not endorse.
What?
as a GTAC, not endorse either any of those measures, prospective measures.
Yeah, I mean, they're right.
As a
you're
GTAC member?
right. They're currently prospective measures, and
Right.
you can endorse because they're not currently certified.
All right. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Maya. Juliet.
What are considered election subjects, or what does that encompass?
So it would be, so election subjects are ballot measures, candidates, and PACs. And none of this applies to, actually, that's not true, I take it back. So those three subjects. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so remember I said that you don't lose your ability to personally express your political views simply because you volunteered for the GTAC. That's not the way the statute works. And the statute, in fact, doesn't directly address personal expression of a public employee's political views. For example, workers can discuss gubernatorial candidates. And we frequently do when I'm at work talk about different types of candidates. So that is not prohibited. But public employers, and in this case, that would be the city of Portland, may regulate the time, place, and manner of personal expression. And we do at the city of Portland regulate the way that we express political views. So the example I gave is one that we have in fact done at the city. A city council may impose restrictions on police officers wearing political buttons while in uniform. Again, when a member of the city is cloaked with the authority of the city, that is not the appropriate time and place to be expressing personal political views. We also have an HR that does not apply to you because it only applies to salaried and hourly workers. And the rule is really pretty generous. I've seen other jurisdictions that are much stricter. We are permitted to candidly express our personal political views as long as it does not interfere with the job. So if you're a rabid supporter of a particular candidate and you're discussing that in the vicinity of another worker who's trying to get their work done and you're interfering with them, or if your conversations are lasting 4 hours on a daily basis, that then becomes interference with the job, and that would not be permitted. Next slide, please. Resolutions by city councils. I included this not because I think you'll have direct experience with this, but it comes up so frequently, people are curious. So remember that city council members can take a position, and so can the city council as a whole. So they can take a position on ballot measures, initiatives, referendums, recall petitions, anything. But what they can't do is they can't require Julia or me to go ahead and draft the resolution. They have to do that themselves because that would be conscripting public resources to affect their political opinion, which they cannot do. So I just put that in there for because I always get questions on that. Okay, next slide, please. I get this question a lot too. I mentioned that during the ballot measure for the change in the form of government, I viewed, I think, everything that went out, and there were also certain things that we had reviewed by the Secretary of State. And what they'll do is they have something called document impartiality review, and you can send it to them before publication, and they'll review it. And you go through a process, and once they have signed off and said that everything looks neutral, they agree with it, then you can include a disclaimer: this information was reviewed by the Oregon Secretary of State's office. And then any complaints filed with the Oregon Secretary of State's office are just summarily dismissed, which is nice when you have a really political, a hot issue, and you really want to get impartial information out, but you want to make really sure that you're staying within the lines. So we did that. We relied on that quite heavily during the ballot measure for the change in government. Next slide, please. And then people always ask me, well, what are the requirements? So here they are. This is why it's great to have the Secretary of State weighing in, because sometimes these can be hard to interpret yourself. The timing of the publication, are you really trying to educate people, or are you, sending it immediately before the vote? Personalized documents or use of personalizing pronouns is a no-no. Use of the word will to describe the results of passage of the measure, because of course it might not pass. So all of those subliminal hints, you're not permitted to do. Use of graphics, check marks, or formatting to emphasize or de-emphasize certain information. So not just the information that's included, but how it's presented has to be balanced. Overly emotional photographs. I love that one because I don't know what it means. And use of phrases similar to campaign slogans would be not permitted. So that's sort of the universe of the impartiality requirements that you need to comply with. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about complaints. Any Oregon elector may file a complaint, and the Secretary of State's Elections Division may initiate its own investigation, and they have done that, although it's relatively rare. And the effect on the election, if there is a complaint, is absolutely none. The date of the election doesn't dictate when the Elections Division makes its determination, and any determination will not change the outcome of the election. Next slide, please. So what are the remedies? And people kind of scoff and they say, well, $75 to $1,000, that's so low. That would just be the cost of doing business. So why not go ahead and do it? And I think there are some real significant reasons not to. And if you go all the way down to the public opinion bullet, that's really the point, is you really lose public credibility when you get hit with the complaint, even if it's ultimately found to be unsubstantiated, because nobody remembers that, right? They just remember the article that says, oh, the city of Portland drew a elections violation complaint with the Secretary of State. So I think that I 100% agree. The civil penalty is quite low, but that's not really the hit that you take. It's the hit to the public credibility. Remember that public trust that we're all working so hard to keep safe as people are increasingly worried about life, and we want them to feel like we are a place that we are transparent and we build trust. Next slide, please. This is really important, probably not for you, but to be aware of. There can be personal liability And there is a statute, ORS 294-100, and it makes public officials, which would include you, responsible for unlawful expenditures of public money personally liable. Now, it's not an election statute, but it has been applied in the election context in private litigation. And this was a true case in 1985. And of course, it came up in the context of fluoridation, which is extremely passionate topic in our part of the nation. And the ruling, the court held that county officials responsible for a public information campaign to publicize fluoridation effects during a measure election could be personally sued. And that goes back, I think, to that fine matrix. And I'm not saying this is what happened there with the county, but if you've got people making a calculation that, well, it's worth the financial fine because we really want to advocate, and that's just going to be the cost of doing business, there is a real significant backstop in the law that says you do that at your own peril. And if you are, willfully including advocacy material after a measure has been certified, after a candidate has declared, after a PAC is active, we can hold you personally liable. So again, I think that's very rare for anyone, but I can't imagine a fact pattern where you would ever be in a situation where this would apply to you as your in your status as a GTAC member. Next slide, please. Oh, that's it. So just to recap, and I'm happy to stay as long as you want to talk about fact patterns and questions. I think that this is a very helpful slide deck, and the Secretary of State's manual. Go back and read that if you have questions. If you still have questions, please reach out to Julia. You are not alone in trying to figure out how to comply with the statute. I am absolutely here to help. Do not call me after, because then I cannot. It's an ethical violation for me to help after. So don't put yourself in that position. I really want you to get the most out of your GTAC participation and feel like you've got the support of the city behind you.
Thank you, Maya. We do have a couple questions so far. Fred, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I don't see Joe on this. Joe, are you there? I know that he had a question about making contributions to candidates, and I think it's okay.
It is okay. Yep.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that he had that answered. Great. Thanks.
Thanks. Juliet, go ahead.
Do you mind if I ask you a question about 294-100 that really doesn't have to do with Portland, since we have a few extra minutes?
Yeah, no problem. That's the with the personal liability.
Yeah, so this is just kind of a hangover from when I was a city manager. I think what it says is for towns over 100,000 people population, you gather signatures or something to enforce it, but the statute doesn't say what about small towns. It doesn't talk about under 100,000. So what is the enforcement mechanism for when public officials spend unlawfully? Do you know?
I've never been able. If they're in a jurisdiction that's under 100,000 residents.
Yes.
Recall. Recall, which I've
never been able to figure out the answer to this.
Yeah, I think then that's the ballot box. And I know that Oregon is unique. We actually have more flexible ethical statutes than most other states because we're relatively small. Almost all of our half of our cities, and I think we have 241 cities in the state of Oregon, and at least half of them are 5,000 or under population. And so it's almost exclusively volunteers doing all of the work. And we really, the law really wants to support that type of activity and not be unnecessarily hard-nosed if people are really trying to do the right thing and just, I call them traps for the unwary. And so that's why that particular statute has 100,000 or, fewer. This statute doesn't apply. It's really for meant to apply to jurisdictions that ostensibly have trained professional staff to help people comply with the law and not capture people who are just, you know, trying to participate in democracy and might not understand all of the fine points. But that's sort of the reason that we have, you know, California is more strict, but their cities tend to be much larger and therefore have professional attorneys that do nothing but represent that city, et cetera.
Thank you, Maya. Amy.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation, first of all. It's just useful to hear it all laid out and to speak with you directly. Is there examples that you thought of in the course of putting this presentation together that might apply to us where we would where in our GTAC work of the type of stuff that we'll be doing in this particular election cycle?
I think some of the questions really identified the fact patterns that seemed most likely to me, where you are attending community events and you want to identify yourself as both a GTAC member and staff or supporter for a particular candidate, where you're being asked to endorse a candidate because of your participation on GTAC. I think those are probably the most likely fact patterns you guys will experience. But you never know what you're going to get with local government. So the bizarre never fails to come up.
Thanks. Terry.
Yeah, if we're playing Stump the Lawyer now, let me try one.
Okay.
Until a measure is certified, we can say sign or don't sign the petition because of what I've learned in GTAC.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to start trash talking now. On the job.
I will say that I don't know whether the code that GTAC wasn't created by code. So I don't know whether the authorizing documents or your bylaws or anything like that has any other rules. So I don't want to tell you to do something because I'm ignorant. I can tell you that it's fine from a state statutory perspective. But I'd have to ask, I'd have to look at the documents to see if there are any other limits.
I don't see any hands, but I'm just going to wait a handful of seconds and see if there's anything else anyone wants to ask or bring up. Fred, go ahead.
Well, I just, per Terry's thing, I'm surmising that a majority of the committee, GTAC in general, and I think we've got a quorum here on this special meeting, that we wouldn't want to prescribe our activities as GTAC members when it came to initiative petitions that are circulating in regards to the city or the state or otherwise. I'm just saying that. I don't know that we don't have to vote on it or anything, unless somebody wants to propose at a future GTAC meeting some change in the bylaws, some addition that would prescribe us as a group from individual members doing that. It seems like we've got carte blanche per Maya's suggestions. Thank you.
Well, but also remember that my personal judgment is very conservative. So whether or not I think something is wise is a very different discussion from whether or not it complies with the law.
Fair enough. I was thinking as a group that we wouldn't want to take a position. Thanks, Maya. It was a great presentation. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I just try to make sure people's eyes aren't glazing over because it's not always the most riveting.
I was riveted.
Julia, you're the exception.
Okay, I'm not seeing any others, but I'll talk kind of slow. Maya, thank you so much. And again, this is good. I'll put the recording online. But really, I just want to echo Maya's offer. To me, often like specific examples come to you later or right before you get into them, or a hypothetical that you didn't offer tonight. And please just reach out to me and we can figure out how to proceed. So always welcome. Don't hesitate at all. And Maya, thank you so much for the time. So just very briefly, we have a lot of GTAC meetings this week. So I wanted to like put them all up there in case anyone wonders what they're doing this week. So tomorrow is the first meeting of our new budget work group. Anyone who wants to come, let me know. Then Thursday is the next meeting of our districts and council operations subcommittee, conversation to be about district offices. Friday is a special meeting of GTAC to scope recommended improvements to community engagement. This is from Juanita's motion at the last GTAC meeting. Then Monday is the next meeting of the voter and candidate education and outreach subcommittee. So pretty much you're meeting a day if you want to come hang out and do GTAC things. And then the next full meeting of GTAC is March 13th at 6 o'clock. Any questions about that? They're all on the website. You can always enter if you're not kind of signed up to one of those groups and you're interested, you can always enter through the public link, or just let me know by email that you want to come. And it's great to see everyone. Thank you so much for being here.